So I've never really had a paranormal experience, which is why I've always erred on the side of skepticism, I think. But I just started to dog sit regularly, overnight stays, and have stayed in 3 homes so far with no issue. I don't ever get scared on my own at night, and especially not when I have dogs with me. I also never have problems getting to sleep and staying asleep, even in places that are new to me. However, this day, I don't know, it was different from the jump. Typically, I get like 8 to 10 hours, but the first night, I got maybe at most 4. So far, I've always slept on the couch with a dim light on nearby, so I don't run into stuff if I have to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. I settle in at around 9 p.m. this night because the dog that I'm sitting is a puppy, and the owner told me that that's when he gets sleepy. I put my headphones in and settle in to watch a few episodes of Misfits until I'm tired enough to turn in. The dog lays down to sleep on my legs. Everything is typical of every house sitting that I've ever had so far. The only thing that I'm not used to, though, is this house has a walkway on the second floor looking down into the room that I'm sleeping in. I'm fine, though. Like I said, I don't really get scared. So I go to sleep at around midnight. The issues this night arose, though, when the dog woke me several times, barking at nothing. Each time this would happen, too, I would settle him again, blame it on him sleeping in a different area and not being used to it, then go back to sleep. It took longer each time, but I did it. Only, it got to the point that every time that I was on the cusp of sleeping, he'd bark or start growling. Finally, though, I managed to fall asleep at around 3:30, only to wake up at 6:30 to the sound of voices talking, sounding like they were in the kitchen, the room over. My initial thought was it was the owners using the Furbo, like a baby monitor but for dogs, that's in there with the crate, because it sounded like it came from the same area. But that didn't make sense though, because the dog was with me and it was 6:30 in the morning, so I called it an auditory hallucination from lack of sleep and I just moved on. Now, he's a pretty big puppy, a Vizsla, 45 pounds at 6 months, so I'm thinking maybe he needs more space on the couch. I switched to the pull-out on the second night. I also put the lights that I dimmed in the kitchen to the max, but it was the same. I go to sleep at 12:30, more on edge today, start clocking noises that I wasn't paying attention to yesterday, but sometimes it sounds like shuffling on the carpet on the second floor. Sometimes it's taps coming from the kitchen that I never hear during the day. I spend a significant amount of time squinting up the darkened walkway, but I don't see anything. But I have the weirdest feeling come over me. It just sort of feels like something is up there. The dog still barks sporadically, sometimes jerking awake because of it. I think that I get like 3 hours of sleep. I wake up again at 6:30 to voices, but they're closer this time, sounding like they're actually in the same room as I'm in. I'm like, okay, I definitely need more sleep if I'm having another auditory hallucination, so I drive home that day to nap for a few hours. Now, I feel like I have to clarify something at this point. Auditory hallucinations when waking up are rare, and I think that I've had them maybe 5 times max before this in my entire life, that I can remember at least. So as much as I'm trying to gloss over it, it's definitely weird. So, on the third night, which was yesterday, I'm like, okay, it's probably just all in my head. Still, I keep the kitchen lights on max, and this time I turn on the lights above the walkway. I get to sleep at 12:30, but then I'm startled awake 2 hours later when the dog freaks out, starts barking and growling, facing towards the foyer, on the other side of the staircase leading up the walkway. He then does something that he never did before this, and runs into the foyer to see if something's there. I'm sitting there with my ears perked, my phone in one hand, wondering if I should call the police or not, but I don't hear anything, and he comes back like 30 seconds later, standing on the pullout next to me and staring at the same place that he was earlier. I'm officially spooked at this point. I'm still hearing stuff. I still feel like something is watching me. I start counting the taps in the kitchen, and it's always 3 sets of 3, which is comforting at first because I think it's an appliance. Except then I realize that I'm pretty sure that's a thing in the supernatural world and not a good thing, right? In any case, I get back to sleep at 5:30 in the morning. This time, though, I'm not woken at 6:30 by voices. Instead, at 7:30, a woman whispers my name directly into my ear, clear as day. I don't know if it's significant or if this happens in auditory hallucinations as well, but this time it's only audible in my exposed ear, since I'm sleeping on my side. Regardless, at this point, I'm done. I feed the dog, let him out, put him in his cage, drive home, and sleep for 4 more hours. It's the 4th night now, and currently midnight while I write this. I'm still hearing stuff around me, even while I'm sitting here in the kitchen with a ton of lights turned on. Sometimes, I feel like I see things moving in my peripherals, and I kind of feel like I'm going crazy, to be honest. So I just want to, share everything that's happening here. Maybe someone could explain some of this and relieve me of my fears, or perhaps confirm them. I'll be up tonight, I think, and I don't plan on sleeping. Back when I was in my late teens, I moved out of home, out of town, then rented a room from some couple. The woman didn't work, but her partner did, so she had a lot of time on her hands, and she tried to control everything in the house, including me. I was working 2 jobs while studying at this point. The woman, who literally had no life besides from trying to mess up other people's lives, started doing weird stuff though. Examples of this were things like, I woke up to find her watching me sleep, she stole my sunglasses at one point, killed my fish, etc. She tried bossing me around and in real life trolling a bit, though she would disappear every full moon to apparently get nude and dance with her coven in the mountains. She claimed to be a witch, and despite my interest in spirituality and tarot, I don't believe in witches or witchcraft. Anyway, I decided at this point that I'd had enough of tolerating her stuff and moved out. But that resulted in her stalking me via turning up to my workplaces and staring at me for hours. I reported her to the police, and then she tried to cyberstalk me via Facebook and phoning me 1,000,000 times. After moving into a new place, I would wake up in the night to see something standing in the corner of my room. Yet whenever I got up or turned the light on, it always disappeared. Hence, I assumed I was dreaming. But eventually it started standing at the foot of my bed. Again, whenever I tried to get up or turn on the light, it would always vanish though. One night, I woke up to it standing there like usual, but this time I could see a creepy woman's face on it, and it was smiling at me. I said get lost, and when I did, it vanished. For a while I didn't see anything, but I started coming up with scratches all over my body. I had no idea where they had come from. I would find them on my arms, chest, hips, and thighs. One night, though, I woke up and ran to the bathroom mirror because I thought something bit me to find scratches on my shoulder, back, like someone had just clawed me. I checked my bed for anything that could scratch me and even visited a doctor who asked me if I was self-harming. I wasn't and couldn't figure out where these scratches were even coming from. The last incident, though, occurred one night when I was half asleep and rolled over to my side. I felt air on my face, and originally I ignored it until I felt a big gust of air directly into my face. I opened my eyes to come face to face with this rotten, bloated, dead-looking woman. She looked wet, like someone killed her and then left her in some water to rot or something. Her body was coming up out from underneath the bed while her head was propped up near my face. I actually screamed in horror and was too scared to get off the bed. I covered my face with the blanket and then started saying prayers and waiting until morning. Eventually the sun rose and I looked around the room, but there was nothing. After that, it never came back, and the scratches, they seemed to heal. It scares me to think about, but I do wonder if it lived under my bed for a period of time or something and was scratching me from underneath. As to where it came from, again, I really don't believe in spells. Whatever it was, though, it wanted to pose as a female, I think, and it was a part of my loser ex-housemate, like a malevolent manifestation of spite or something. And that's really all I can put it down to. Somehow, that woman, she managed to cause this. This is the story my aunt told me years ago. My aunt and her family lived in a very rural and backwoods area of Lincoln County, West Virginia. She said that her father would go fox hunting periodically. He and the other men would travel up into the mountains to their camp. There they would let their dogs run, chase foxes, and spend the evening talking and telling stories among themselves. My aunt had many siblings, which was not uncommon back in the 1950s, backwoods West Virginia. Her mother decided that she would walk with several of the younger children up to her husband's, my aunt's father's, camp. My aunt was one of the party, and she said that they walked a long way back up on the mountain and spent a few hours relaxing and spending time with her dad. The group had such a nice time that they didn't realize it had gotten so late. My aunt's father gave his wife a lantern in order for her and the kids to be able to see on their long journey down the mountain. As the group left, the light from the fox hunters' camp eventually faded out of sight. As they walked on down the mountain, her mother noticed a small ball of light about the size of a softball coming down the mountain behind them. Thinking that it was her husband needing something, she and the children stopped on the trail to wait. As they stood there, the light slowly made its way down the path and into better view. My aunt said, though, that the closer that it got, they could see that it wasn't actually a lantern at all, but a ball of light floating about 3 feet from the ground. She said that once her mother realized this, she put the children in front of her and told them to run as fast as they could down the old trail that was cut into the mountain. My aunt told me that they all ran as fast as they could down the hill. She said that the faster they ran, the faster the ball of light moved. My aunt said that they finally got to where their home was and ran inside and locked the door. According to my aunt, they were all terrified, and when they finally got the courage to look out the window, there was nothing there. The past 4 or 5 weeks, mainly when autumn started taking hold, my son, a 13-year-old boy, a good honest honor roll all-American Boy Scout type, has been growing increasingly nervous at night around our home. We live on a lane street off a busy street where there are several businesses, gas stations and restaurants, so it's definitely not a remote place at all. However, at the end of the lane, it dead ends to a sort of little turnaround loop and comes back to meet the lane again. At that loop, there's a little patch of woods, and he's claimed to have seen a tall silhouette at the top of the hill in the wooded area watch him if he goes near there. Now, this only happens at dusk, and he claims that when he sees the figure it remains still, but then vanishes into the ground. He described it as sort of melting away as if it was sinking into a puddle of lava, but it sinks quickly. He also believes that it waits for him to see it before it melts away to make sure that he knows that it's still there. So, that's his experience, and here's why I'm actually inclined to believe him. So flashback to September of this year, September 13th to be exact. I remember the date and probably will for the rest of my life, as it was the day my ex-wife miscarried our 5th child. It was in 2011, and it goes without saying that it was a very difficult time for me. It bothers me to this day at times, so on that night I was outside of my porch smoking a cigarette around 2 or 3 a.m., talking on the phone with my new wife while she was on her lunch break. After the phone ended, I flicked my smoke and turned to open the door when I heard a voice call out. It was a child, pre-teen sounding, maybe 9 to 10 years old, and it kept calling out for Daddy. I turned around and looked towards the woods, thinking it carried over from the next street past the woods, and listened again for it. And sure enough, it called out again for Daddy. But it was beyond a doubt coming from the woods of all places. I turned the flashlight on my phone and walked over to the edge and shined my light around. And when I got close to the opening of the tree line, a huge buck came barreling out of the darkness right past me, like a scoring-sized deer, 10 or 12 points at least. It was dark, and maybe I'm overestimating it, but man, it was huge, I know that much. And it had zero reason being in the middle of a crowded set of neighborhoods like that. I'd never seen it before, and I haven't seen it after that as well. I haven't heard the voices either, but now my son seems to be seeing that tall shadow. I don't know if what I heard and saw with that deer was the same thing my boy is seeing now, but he just isn't the kind of kid to lie about something like this. I mean, my son's mental health is fine. He doesn't experience schizophrenia or anything remotely close to that. It is a certain area and a certain time of the day that he's claimed to see what he sees as well. I'm certain that I can tell the difference between an animal sound and a human voice, regardless of setting, time, day, or mental state. But what I heard was not a trick of the mind either. It was either a human being I could not locate, or something mimicking a human being perfectly. I'm fully aware that deer can pass through urban areas, and I've seen it myself many times. Mostly doe and never a large buck like this, but yeah, I know that it can happen. I've never seen a deer in town though. I've lived in this house for 3 years and I haven't seen any deer in the neighborhood prior to this. I also understand that certain things may lead them to change their movements and bedding and mating patterns and stuff. That very well may be the case for the buck part of the equation, but still, the whole thing was weird. I'll also be trying to mount a trail cam if I'm allowed to. I have to get permission from the groundskeeper, as I think it's technically school property or something. If I get anything, then I'll be sure to share the pictures with you guys, but for now, this is all I've got. We had a Halloween party this year, and it ran pretty late, and the last few people were leaving around like 3 a.m. I was chilling out front, and a dude that nobody knew was sweeping up the cans and cigarettes everyone left outside. We live in the city though, so it isn't that uncommon. He wasn't homeless, at least I don't think he was, but he was clearly down on his luck and looking for tips. Unfortunately, I didn't have any cash, but my roommate Mike ran inside to grab change for him. It ended up only being literal change, but I hung out and offered him a cigarette and chatted with him. He told me that he was pretty much on his last chance. It's hard to get a job on parole. He's just doing whatever he can. He told me that not long ago, someone working at a pizza shop said that he could sweep their sidewalk, and all they gave him was a quarter and a soda for his efforts. A quarter and a soda. Now, everyone else was gone, and it was just me and sidewalk dude, so I go up to bed. I'm still pretty hyped from the party, so I'm just laying in bed on my phone for a while, and I would guess about 30 minutes later I hear a voice, but it's coming from inside my house, downstairs. The voice said, "Mike, you got the soda?" I went downstairs immediately and saw that the door from our kitchen to our mudroom was closed. There's a door from the mudroom to outside. No one ever closes the mudroom door. It is never closed. So I went upstairs to get backup, walked to the mudroom door and said that I was going to open it and that they can just leave. Eventually I got the courage up to open it, and when I did, no one was there. But the door to the outside was open. I closed it, locked it, went to the front door and made sure that it was locked too. When I jiggled the doorknob, I heard sidewalk guy say, "Still here, just sitting outside." I don't know what would have happened had I not heard him, but the reason this freaked me out so bad was that he said, "Mike, you got the soda," after telling me a story about a terrible person asking him to sweep and giving him a quarter and a soda, and that was it. And this when Mike had also just given him change. And also because it was very clear that somehow he had gotten into my house. So, I'm home alone and my mum's out visiting family and picking up some stuff. I'm chilling, playing Animal Crossing with my dog Ty, sort of laying on my bed, keeping me company. When Ty suddenly bolts up, heckles raised, and growls, which is rare for him to do. He's only ever done this once. It was at this point, though, that I sort of focused my hearing and I heard someone downstairs say hello, and me, being stupid, I shouted back. I went downstairs to see two guys outside, looking in through the window. So I went and opened the door to see what they wanted, since I was expecting a parcel and I thought it was them. But they immediately started with, "Hi, we have a warrant for the electricity meter?" And it immediately felt off. You don't get a warrant to check an electrical meter, right? So I did the only thing that I could think of. I told them that I was underage and home alone, with Ty watching them through the window. I said that I would call my mum, shut the door, and I tried to lock it. But I couldn't. The key wouldn't turn. So I instantly called my mum. I explained what was going on, and I barricaded the door as best as I could so that nobody could move the handle down. After a few minutes, I managed to turn the key and finally locked the door. I went upstairs to check the cameras, and lo and behold, it showed 3 men standing outside the door, occasionally looking at the cameras and trying to stay hidden. At one point, you can see 2 of them enter the house as well, then run out and quietly shut the door. This was the same time that Ty went running down the stairs. As I kept watching the playback, I saw the van door open and shut, so I think that there were at least 4 people. I have no idea who these men were, mind you, or how they even unlocked the door, and I'm never going to open the door without a weapon nearby, ever again. But 3 hours later, Mum comes back and watched the footage back, and they brought a dog bar. The ones that the stray catchers use with the long bar and snare bit on the end. She suspects that they picked the lock on the front door so that I couldn't lock it. Thankfully, I watched a lot of movies and tutorials on how to barricade a door so they couldn't get in. She found the number on the van to call, so she called them. And the next day, after Mum called the company number on the van and ripped them a new one, apparently I was still asleep when she called. She thinks that they were here to install a pay-as-you-go meter for the electricity, but nothing's been touched or moved. Ty stayed in my room with me last night and helped me to get some sleep. They haven't come back yet, but I will be carrying my knife on me whenever I take Ty out for a walk, and we'll be checking the cameras when I'm on my own regularly. If I get any more info about what happened or if there's any updates, I'll let you know, but unfortunately, that's it for now, and I feel really uncomfortable. For context, this haunting, I guess I'll call it, happened from about 6 to 10 years old or so. I lived in a relatively new home in a small neighborhood in western Massachusetts. I had a loving family, and apart from what I'll talk about here, I had a very normal childhood. So I'll start by saying that I really don't remember too much from my early childhood, but these experiences stand vividly in my mind as if they happened yesterday. It started off when I was about 6 with just terrifyingly vivid reoccurring nightmares. Nightmares that honestly seem out of place for a young kid who was never allowed to be exposed to violence or horror content of any kind. But one common one, though, included me trying to desperately jump up onto my bed while a large snake slowly approached me from my hallway. I would feel pure and unadulterated terror as it kept getting closer and eventually struck me, to which I would wake up in a sweat. One of the worst ones, though, is where me and my father would be standing in front of a hallway that branched off to the left and led into my parents' room. The 5 or 10 humanoid-like figures would bound out of the darkness of the hallway and proceed to eat both me and my father alive. I could hear him screaming as they reached him, and when they eventually reached me, I would wake up tingling where the humanoids had first bit down onto me. keep in mind, I was very young when these dreams began, but they persisted for at least the next 4 years. Now, dreams alone are not enough for me to get on here for the first time and pour out my childhood trauma to strangers. I remember, though, that I began to feel I was being watched in my room at night or something. It seemed like the darkness in my room became oppressive, and I would be filled with pure dread and terror. Although I didn't know what it was, it felt as if something was about to happen. Like every molecule in that room had stopped moving at once. And this is when I first saw him. My bed was situated where my head was against a wall, and the foot of my bed pointed towards a window. To my right was the door leading into my room on the same wall my head was against, and just to the left of that was a door on the adjacent wall leading into a Jack and Jill bathroom that I shared with my sister. There was just enough light on from the window, though, that I could see the outline of a tall black figure with the outline of a top hat sitting on its head. I don't fully remember what his face looked like, as this was at least 10 years ago, but I do remember seeing some sort of liquid reflecting light where his face should have been. In any case, though, I quickly ripped the covers over my head and sat there frozen with terror, unable to move. This went on too for many, many months. Every time that sense of dread filled me, I knew that he was there, but would not dare to look for fear that he would attack me or something. There were a few times, too, that I was so convinced I was not going to make it, I screamed for my parents, and they always came running to find, nothing. My dad would always tell me, "Who's the scariest thing in this house?" To which I would lie and tell him that it was, of course, my strong gusto father. He always assured me nothing would happen to me while he was there, but I knew that if this thing wanted to do me harm, there was nothing that he could do. Up to this point, by about 8 years old, the nightmares had become more graphic and appearances more frequent, always filling up that doorway, just standing and watching. Thankfully, up to this point, I'd never been physically touched or attacked by it. That was until one night when I was bunkered down beneath my sheets and that familiar feeling of dread washed over me. I froze in my bed with the same feeling of anticipation, only this time, something would finally happen. There was a scraping noise at first that I could tell came from the bathroom, and suddenly, my leg was grabbed through the covers. I freaked out, bawling, crying, and beelined to my parents' room where I stayed for the night. I was never touched again, but he was there most nights after that until, we moved states when I was about 10. Now, of course, I tried to explain what was happening to me, but it was always brushed off, and I eventually just stopped talking about it as no one believed me anyway, and I did not want to scare my little sister any more than I already had. But fast forward to 2 years ago when I was 18, I was sifting through old storage boxes filled with my old school drawings and notebooks my parents had kept. I was flipping through a school notebook filled with grammar practice and such when my heart instantly sank. Because there, on my school notebook, was a drawing of the Top Hat Man. I practically shoved it down my parents' throats while shouting, "See, I told you it was him!" My parents went pale and profusely apologized for not believing me. They even went as far as to ask me if I needed counseling. In reality, I was just relieved that I had some proof, I guess, and today I absolutely love horror as a genre. Go figure. I guess maybe it's because it gives me a feeling of control that I never had as a kid. Anyway, if you've had any similar experiences, then I would love to hear about them if you would be happy to share them with me. I still obviously think about all this stuff from time to time, but thankfully, for me, it seems to be over now.